Microphone check. Is the microphone clear? Sound clear?
Yes, it's clear. You're live.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. I praise Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. I ask Allah to raise the rank, the honor, the status, the esteem of Sayyiduna Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his pure family and his honorable companions, and all those who follow them in excellence until the day of judgment. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has all of you in a state of well-being, that all of you woke up in a state of gratitude for the favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of faith and Islam. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants all of us a good ending, that we die on the status of Islam. So I wanted to summarize some things before I go into details. As I said that I was going to talk about some issues of belief. And it is important that I discuss this issue because I thought about something. And me, like all of you, we have a concern for anyone who is a person who said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that Allah guides them. We always want that for people. And for the general people, those Muslim and non-Muslim, we want people to be guided. This is our means, this is our mission, to call people to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. So we should always look for means to bring people to Islam and to have people guided on the right path. But in the same breath, we must understand that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala guides whom He wills. It is Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala's eternal will that some people will be of the people of felicity, Ahlus Sa'ada. And then some people, they're going to be people who are going to be losers in the hereafter. And there is two aspects. Those who are going to be winners on the day of judgment, and those who are going to be losers on the day of judgment. There are going to be a portion of the nation that's going to enter Jannah, and there's going to be a portion of the people that's going to enter An-Nar, the hellfire. This is by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we must always understand and accept ما شاء الله كان وما لم يشاء لم يكن. Whatever Allah willed to be, shall be, and whatever Allah did not will to be, shall not be. With that said, we should understand that all our job is to convey the message. It is not within our capacity, nor does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala order us with forcing faith in the hearts of people. We cannot do that. So all of us have to have a sense of contentment with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his creation. فَعَالٌ لِمَا يُرِيدُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who does everything he wills. If you go to Masjid Muhammad of Atlantic City Facebook page, this video is playing there as well if you're looking on YouTube. So all you got to go to Masjid Muhammad of Atlantic City, the Facebook page, and the video is playing live there for those who wanted to share it on Facebook. So today, I want to make some points that I want you to write down, please, because one of the issues that I find is that with the internet and the vast amount of information that comes at the stroke of a key, many of us, we don't have discipline. We're like the young child who sees something and is not able to distinguish between its harm or its benefit. They just want to grab it. You know, I have a 9-month-old son, or 10 months now. May Allah protect him. And he puts everything in his mouth. He doesn't distinguish between what is good to put in your mouth and what is bad to put in your mouth. Whatever he sees, if he gets his hands on it, he's going to put it in his mouth. Many of us, in the religious sense, with the internet, are just like that. Whatever we see, we put it in our mouth or in our ears, and we consume it. Whatever it is, good, bad, iman, kufr, sunnah, bid'ah, shirk, tawheed, doesn't matter. Go. This is a problem. I'm speaking straight because I need to lay a foundation for you. And when you do that, what you expose yourself is to all kinds of diseases, all kinds of sicknesses, all kinds of foreign objects that may harm you because you don't distinguish between what is beneficial, what is harmful, what is true, what is false. And part of that is because the person hasn't been taught how to distinguish between good and bad. And that is an issue that many of us need to think about. So when I mentioned this thing that I mentioned yesterday about the person who I believe in his mind that he is sincere, I have no doubt about it. In his mind, I'm sincerely trying to discover the truth. I have no doubt about it. I don't accuse him of being insincere or not wanting the truth. But what I do realize is he doesn't have the ability to distinguish. And he's all over the place. And many of us are like that. In our search for truth, we have no criterion to distinguish between truth and falsehood. So we just consume information from wherever we can get it. And the internet has offered us the ability to take everything that's available with no way of distinguishing. Tell you. Let me bring this more closer to what I'm saying. I want to put these things clear as possible because you're going to have to make some choices in your acquisition of Islamic knowledge and belief, right? There is for certain a such thing as al-haq and al-batil. There is truth and falsehood. Both exist. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created both elements. There are the people of truth and the people of falsehood. Imam al-Ghazali, he described them scholars as the scholars of the Akhirah and the scholars of this world, which he called evil scholars. So they're opposites, but they both exist. And you're going to come in contact with both in the lifetime if you live long enough. Your job is to distinguish between the two. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us certain things by which we distinguish. The first He gave us of them is al-aql, intellect. Al-aql. And I'll put it. So that's the first thing Allah gave us. He gave us al-aql, intellect. It is the aql, the intellect, by which aids you to examine things, right? So that's why in the Islamic law, if one is insane or doesn't have their intellect, they're not morally responsible, because the conditions for responsibility, being accountable, are to have a sound mind, aql, right? To be pubescent and to hear the call of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? These are three conditions. So if a person's aql is not sound, then they're not morally accountable, right? They're not responsible. So an aql is important. It's very important that you have a sound intellect. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us prophets and messengers and sent with them scriptures, books that explain and convey what Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala wants from us. And by the sound intellect, we distinguish the truthfulness of a prophet or someone who is making claims, right? And what does Allah give us to help us do that with our intellect? He gives those prophets mu'jizat, miracles. So those prophets are given miracles to support their claim of prophethood. And the sound mind tells us that those miracles that those prophets came with, that others in their time cannot match, are signs of their truthfulness in what they say they are conveying from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The basis to understand that is al-aql, the mind. And the mind, the sound intellect, when I say the mind, I mean the sound intellect, it tells us and guides us to follow those prophets who have proven their truthfulness, that Allah gave them these miracles. And now we understand that what they're conveying from God is true. That is the aql, that is the sound mind that leads us to that. So once we have our sound minds and we are sent a messenger, a prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam, in our case, Sayyiduna Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. With those miracles, our mind leads us that he is truthful. Then what he conveyed which is the Quran, and the Sunnah is revelation. So we confirm that revelation based on the truthfulness of that prophet, that we confirm this truthfulness based on our intellect, right? Once we understand that, then we get the message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of the Quran and that which the messenger conveyed, which is the Sunnah, which is known as an-naql. I'll put it. So then you have an-naql. So now you have al-aql and an-naql. An-naql, revelation, meaning the Quran and the Sunnah. So everything we want to learn, when we have these two aspects that Allah has given us to distinguish between truth and falsehood, right? Now, it's very important that you understand this, and you need to understand this well, right? And these two elements, they work together to help us distinguish between truth and falsehood. What has the priority? The priority is an-naql, revelation. And al-aql, the intellect, is an evidence of the truthfulness of an-naql, of revelation, right? The mind, the sound intellect, is an evidence for the truthfulness of revelation. So in other words, just because we have revelation, it doesn't wipe out our intellect. Do you understand this? In fact, we are responsible for using both revelation and our intellect. If you understand this lesson I'm giving you, it'll help you. It'll help you greatly. Now, also, after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the time of the Prophet sallallahu, let me stop. In the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the companions, they had the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in front of them. So whenever there was an issue of understanding the revelation, they could simply go ask the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And through revelation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would clarify many issues for them. After the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet is no longer available for anyone to ask anything and use that as a religious judgment. Notice what I said. The Prophet is not available for anyone to ask him after his death anything and use that as a religious judgment. Why? Because with the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, revelation has stopped. There is no revelation after Sayyiduna Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So no one can come and say, Allah revealed to me such and such, right? So that means what is left for us to understand revelation? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam informed us that what is left are al-ulama, the scholars. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said in what was related by al-Bukhari, that the scholars, al-ulama, they are the inheritors of the prophets, and they inherit knowledge, right? So it is the job after the Prophet ﷺ for the scholars, mainly those among the companions, and then the succeeding generation of at-tabi'een, and then those who after them, all the way down to our day. Scholarship. So those scholars, they inherit that knowledge from the Prophet ﷺ, and they explain it to the people, because not everyone is going to be a scholar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not will that everyone would be a scholar. It is not possible for the preservation of the world that everyone is a scholar. It's not possible. Everything else that is needed in the world for us to exist would be ruined if everyone was just a scholar. So everybody can't do that. So there's going to be a portion of the people who are engaged in scholastic activity. They're engaged in being scholars and seeking knowledge, and they must exist, but not everybody. And Allah gave us this indication by his saying in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلِ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. So there's going to be classes of people, which the scholars told us. There are those scholars who are ulama in the different field, and then there are the common people who ask those ulama about that field. So this is how our religion reaches us. And Muslims, Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, selected the best of those scholars in every time and place to convey this religion to the masses of people. And those scholars, they convey that information with unbroken chains of narration in terms of their learning method back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, with that said, that's your foundation. I hope this is very clear. That's your foundation to understand how we get this deen, how we get the religion of Islam, how we get the rules. This is how it comes about for every single person, right? Now, during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's given us revelation. The Quran is being revealed. He's explaining the Quran. That's his job. He's explaining the meanings of the Quran. He's teaching that to his companions. And his companions are recording the Quran. Some of them are recording the Sunnah. And they pass that down to the next generation, as I told you. After the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the companions are faced with a challenge. We still have to guide people. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not here, yet we still have to convey the religion, because the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must be conveyed until the day of judgment, as revelation has instructed us. So the companions, they select among themselves those among them who are the scholars of the companions. Stop. You notice I said they select among themselves those who are the scholars among the companions. What does that indicate? That not all of the companions were scholars. Not every one of the companions was someone you go ask questions about the religion. No, that was not the case. Among the companions were the ulama, and among the companions were those who were regular people who had the blessing and the honor of being in the company of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is an indication for another thing, and I'll go to it real quick, that just the mere gaze of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave you a high status. It made you a companion. And that gaze had a spiritual effect on the individual. Hence, all of the companions of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, are the best just by the gaze of Rasulullah, sallallahu wasallam alayhi. And that's another side thing, which is an indication to something else. But that gaze didn't make you a scholar. That gaze gave you a rank and an honor and a blessing. But what made you a scholar was the knowledge that you acquired from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So among the companions were selected people, less than 20, that were the ulama, the scholars of the companions. Among them were like Abu Bakr, Umar, Ali, Uthman, Aisha, and others. Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Ubay bin Ka'b. And some of them were more skilled in different fields of knowledge. They were not all the same. Some were specialists in one field, some were specialists in other fields. But these, among others, were the ulama of the Sahaba. And when the other companions had issues that were confusing to them or they didn't understand, they would have recourse to those great scholars among the companions. And that's where they would get their legal rulings and their judgments. With that said, this group of scholars among the companions likewise had students that were followers of the companion. They are the next generation. So you have the generation of the companions, you got the scholars of the companions, and common people of the companions. Let me stop to give you the understanding of this so it really highlights in your mind. When the Prophet ﷺ passed from this world, salawatullahi wasalam alayhi, there were around 124,000 companions. At the Prophet's death, there were around 124,000 companions. You hear that number? Roughly around that number. Out of all those companions, there were less than 20 scholars who gave legal rulings. Right? So out of the 124,000 companions, only less than 20, and it wasn't 20, and there were some who may gave some, so we add some, but there were less than 20 who gave legal rulings. So the idea, even in the time of the companions, that everybody was a scholar is a fallacy. This, no doubt, this can be researched. I'm just laying a foundation for you so we can understand something. So those 20 or less scholars are the main people who the succeeding generation took knowledge from. At-tabi'in, the followers of the companions. And likewise, those judgments and those rulings and the understanding of the religion by the succeeding generation of the followers, among the followers were scholars and common people, right? At the time of the followers, you have famous scholars among them who took from those selected scholars of the companions. So if I wanted to say in understanding the Quran, you had famous scholars and understanding fiqh and all of those things, like Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And they were in selective cities. Abdullah ibn Abbas in Mecca, Abdullah ibn Umar in Medina, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud in Iraq. These is by way of example, right? So I'll give you 3 of the main companions for Quran, for some legal rulings, were those 3 in those different areas. So there were some people who studied in Mecca, and the main teacher of there was Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas, among other teachers, but he was among the Sahaba teachers in Mecca, who were among the scholars from the Sahaba that resided in Mecca and taught in Mecca. You had in Medina Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar, right? And you had in Iraq Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And the generation of the followers at Tabi'un, they learn from those. Now these are scholars. And the people in those sessions, their students are scholars. The common people are hundreds of thousands of people as Islam spreads, and they are going about their regular life. They're going about, they learn from the teachers, they learn their knowledge, and they go about their life. They're not engaged in the sciences of knowledge, in the different various sciences of the Islamic sciences. It is those scholars that are doing that. So in each generation, and I just need you to get this because I'm going to come back and fill all this stuff in with names later. But for right now, I just want you to get the concept. So now, after the Sahaba die off, when they pass away, what is left to fulfill their work are the scholars among the Tabi'in, among the followers, right? Those scholars among the followers are now developing, because Islam is spreading. Remember, it's no longer just in the Arabian Peninsula. It has moved into Egypt, towards Persia, Syria, all the way into Iraq, towards Iran. It's big now. It's not just in this Arabian Peninsula, Mecca, Medina. It's went into Yemen. It's people all over the place. And at the same time, you have an Islamic government governing all these. So you have the Khilafate. You have first the Abu Bakr, then Umar, then Uthman, then Ali, then Muawiyah, and now you have Muawiyah and Banu Umayyah, and so forth. As it spreads to the Abbasiyun, you have these different, the Abbasid Caliphate. These are rulers, and within this, there's an Islamic government going on. Don't forget that, right? This ain't a bunch of bandits doing whatever they want. There's government, there's rules, there's judges. There's a lot of things going on in addition to Islamic scholarship. I need us to get our mind out of our present day situation to understand this well. In the time of the Sahaba, you couldn't do what we do today. Not every layman just do what he want, come up with his own opinion. He end up in jail. You had a ruler. You had a Khalifa. Like we have the president, you had a Khalifa. You had a ruler over the Muslims. They appointed judges. You had courts. And you had scholars. Not everybody do what they want. So I want you to, because it's very important, because sometimes we put our present day context on the time of the companions and the followers. So we say, I'm following the Salaf, but our reality is nothing like the reality of the Salaf at all. Not even in the situation of the world. In the time of the Salaf, you always had an Islamic government. You always had an Islamic ruler. You always had a Khalifa. over the Muslims. You always had courts, judges. You always had real scholars who were qualified scholars. Most of those scholars were judges. And you had common people who were common people. Common people weren't making judgments. Common people weren't allowed to just, I do what I want, I pick what I want, I follow what I want. No, 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 no. That was not how it works. So you must understand this very, very, very important. You gotta have a history, you gotta have an understanding of some things to understand why things are they are. So in that time of the Tabi'een, then the senior of the Tabi'een, they have their students. At this time, you're talking about the time of the great Imams, Abu Hanifa, Malik, and Ash-Shafi'i, right? They are in that generation of the students of the followers and the students of the followers, including Imam Ahmed. At this time, Imam Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, Ahmed, right? They're working on, and around them are a bunch of student scholars themselves. They're working on developing the science of al-fiqh, the rules of the religion. They're developing that. And these are the foremost scholars in their time in the Islamic world, right? And just as in the time of the Sahaba, there were selected groups among the Sahaba who were the scholars who gave the legal rulings. Likewise, in the time of the Tabi'een, there were hundreds of thousands of Muslims, and then there were among them selected scholars. Those scholars passed to their students who were the time of the four Imams. And those four Imams, they were among the greatest scholars of Islamic law and giving legal rulings in their time. These weren't just layman people. They were the top ranking jurists and scholars in the Muslim nation. At a time when Islamic scholarship was at its highest level. It was the time of the Salaf. Why? They were protected within the structure of an Islamic government. There was a system in place. There was laws that were carried out. There were real qualified judges, right? And like every society, it had its problems. No society doesn't have problems. But the structure was there. During the time of those great Imams, Malik, Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, Ahmed, there were other great scholars who were at their level, and some even higher than some of them in certain areas. However, the students of those other scholars didn't convey their complete rulings in a systematic structure to succeeding generations, as was the case with those four Imams, Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, and Ahmed. Their knowledge was conveyed by the succeeding generation of their students in a complete, systematic way with an unbroken chain to the next generation, as was the case of the companions. Hence, after several decades and centuries, those other scholars, all of their rulings and judgments were not preserved, but those four Imams, their judgments of the whole of the Sharia was preserved, was, how should I say, was preserved, was recorded, was verified, was checked, was sorted out by the succeeding generation of their great students who were scholars and succeeding generations after them. And this process has continued to our day today. That's in fiqh. After you talking about the generation of Imam Shafi and Ahmed, the next generation after that would include their students who were the scholars of those great Imams like Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. But after those great Imams in fiqh, then you have the great Imams in hadith like al-Bukhari, like Muslim, like at-Tirmidhi, like Abu Dawood, an-Nasa'i, Ibn Majah, and those scholars of that rank. And they were not the only scholars in their time. There were many other great scholars, but their works wasn't preserved as the works of those great Imams of hadith. After those Imams of hadith, then you get those great Imams of Aqidah, like Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. Why? Because as the Islamic government is spreading and going into different lands, different ideas are developing in the Muslim lands. And the scholars of those Muslim lands start to deal with issues, particularly in related to the science of al-Aqidah, that they acquired from succeeding generations. So you remember all this stuff is going on at the same time. I'm just trying to give you a picture, a summarized picture of the environment and how these things work. So by the time of the 4th century, right, the science of al-fiqh, the science of al-hadith, the science of al-aqidah are developing into systematic structures, which in our terms of fiqh and aqidah, we call madhabs. What is a madhab? It is the systematic structure of a qualified scholar of legal rulings or rulings from the primary Islamic sources that are taught to the layman in a structured way so they can learn their religion, because they're not scholars. They cannot do the work of a scholar, deducing rulings from the Quran and the Hadith and knowing what is the consensus and what is not a consensus and knowing the different types of analogy and different tools of personal legal rulings. No, every common person has the ability to do that, which is the false claim of people today, that everybody can just get the Quran and Sunnah and go ahead and do it yourself. That wasn't the way of the Salaf. The Salaf never accepted that. As I gave you a summary of that, right? That was not the way of the Salaf. There were selected scholars, and that was their job. And the rest of the people, they did their regular life stuff, and they learned what they had to learn among the personal obligations of the religion, and they fulfilled it. So all of those scholars, up to the 4th century, they had their unbroken chains of knowledge, and there was something as known as al-Jama'ah, which was the majority of the Muslim nation. That became the dominant way of understanding this religion. This is just historical facts, right? So with that understood, this is how our religion reached us in the manner known as Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah. That's how knowledge was transferred to us all the way down to today. Now, every time you study Islam, historically and globally, you will see that these facts were common to every Muslim land. Now that I'm out of time, I want to summarize something back to Aqidah. So that's a point. I'm going to come back and expand on this more and bring it down to get a structure for you. So what I need you to concentrate on today, is the importance of al-aql, the intellect, in relation to understanding an-naql, the revelation, meaning the Quran and the Sunnah, how the revelation was conveyed to the succeeding generations after the companions and those after them, and what was the relationship of scholars in their function of conveying the religion, and what was the relationship of common people in receiving the religion, right? This is the point that I'm making here. The other point, and I'm going to make it brief, and I indicated it yesterday. When we don't use scholars as the scale of understanding our religion, and we leave it to every common person to interpret the religion, we are in fact making a mistake that is against the methodology of the Sahaba, those who follow them, those who follow them, those who follow them, all the way down to our day. So when we want to determine in our time right and wrong, we're going to have resource to the Quran and the Sunnah and the various Islamic sources through the lens of al-ulama, through the lens of the scholars, not through our own lens. Notice that. And that is no different from the companions and the followers of the companions. They had to understand the Quran and the Sunnah through the lens or through the medium of the scholars among them, not the common people. It's very important to understand that. So with that said, we don't pay attention to common people in their judgment of the religion that is not based on scholarly resources. Why? It's not your function. Just as if in the worldly sciences, you don't take the opinion who's not a specialist in the field you're trying to learn. You don't. You don't even pay them no attention. You go to the specialists in the field. If a guy is not a mechanic, you're not going to ask him how to fix your car. If a guy is not a doctor, you're not going to ask him how to cure a disease you have, right? That's just natural, no different in the Islamic sciences. So if we start using this methodology of realizing that the scholars have a function, we cut down 80% of our disputes once we start to realize the importance of scholarship. Why do I say we cut down so much? Because the scope of research is lessened when we're researching through scholarly lens and not through the lens of every common person who has an opinion. It's not the way you do it. All right. Now, the last point I wanted to make is in terms of Aqidah, in terms of belief. I don't know if y'all paid attention what I read to you yesterday. So I'm going to read it, a part of it, two parts of it, that stood in my mind. And because someone sent to me, and they would say, you rush to consider something disbelief. We don't say what's disbelief and not disbelief, which is a problem. I said there is Iman and Kufr. There is al-haq and batil. There is faith and disbelief. There is truth and falsehood. I want any sane person to use their aql, right? Use your intellect. The person put, however, as with Christianity, Judaism, and the ancient Near East history shows, and Islam is no different, the God of these traditions was very much described and appeared in the form, surah, of a man, shab, in Islam. Did you hear that? He said that the God of these traditions, said, and Islam is no different. The God of these traditions was very much described and appeared in the form, and we use the Arabic word surah, of a man, shab. Shab is a young man, right? In Arabic, in Islam. How would you read that and interpret that to say that is Islam? That God appeared, was described and appeared in the form of a man, and say that's Islam. How could a sound-minded person who studies Islam come to the conclusion that God, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, is described and appeared in the form of a man? And you ask me, how did I consider that disbelief and consider such a person as a kafir? Really? Then that means you don't know Islam at all. The very most important aspect of Islam is at-Tawheed. And at-Tawheed, the oneness of Allah, is to distinguish Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, who has no beginning to his existence, from created things. Relative. And he doubled down on it. He said any true researcher who has no gripe to grind, no side to play, no bias to promote, etc., will see that the God of the scriptures, the Torah, the New Testament, Injil, and the Quran, and prophetic narratives, ahadith, is indeed one who has a sort of form, and that form manifests, appears to those whom he pleases, both in the real and in true dreams of the prophets, and the real and true spirits of day-to-day life of these prophets and messengers. And someone asks, can you say this is not Islam? Definitively, you must say this is not Islam. I mean, if we question something explicit as that, is that Islam or not? Really, 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 we have a problem. You know, they say that Houston, we have a problem. Yeah, we got a big one. When we don't understand, you can't get no more explicit in disbelief in kufr than that. You cannot. And I'm saying that to say these are the concepts that are coming from people who read the Quran and the Sunnah without using their intellect. There is the absence of aql to come into that. And misunderstanding an-naql, the revelation, because you didn't use your aql. If you understand what I'm saying. So I want to make you understand something. When we say about the belief in Allah, you must understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is distinctly different. I think distinctly different from any of his creation. In any way, Allah does not resemble created things. Please, 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 please understand that. If you don't understand the details of verses of the Quran and hadith of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, please keep in your mind Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not resemble anything in his creation, not in all ways, not in some ways, not in one way. Laysa kamithlihi shay'un. Nothing absolutely resembles Allah. I don't know how clear to get this across to the mind of our people. And lastly, I got 3 minutes. I advise you people, all of us, control your desire to just be all over the place. Sit down with some teacher somewhere and learn. Learn well before you go somewhere else. We have brothers who listen to Wahhabis in the morning, Asharis in the afternoon, Shia in the late afternoon, Christians at night, Jews at midnight, and then before Fajr, they try to put all that stuff together and make a religion. And that's how all over the place we be. You listen to one person telling you Allah is in heaven, and you must literally believe that. You listen to another person tells you Allah is without a place. You listen to another person tells you Allah is everywhere, and you wonder why you confused. You wonder why you confused. You are not established enough to do that. You don't have the skill. Humble yourself. You're going to get confused. That's why you can't distinguish between Ahl Sunnah and Wahhabism, because you all over the place. You listen to Imam Amin in the morning, Fulan among the Wahhabis in the afternoon, this one among the Shiite. You're going to be confused. Take your time to learn one thing well. One thing well. And then once you understand that well, then you might move on to research something else. This idea of comparative religion, you need to know religion first before you compare anything. You can't compare schools of thought when you don't know one school of thought. You're making a mess. Please, I beg you, stop, or you harm yourself. Calm down. Sit down and learn. Take your time. I keep telling you, there's no such thing as microwave Islam. It doesn't exist. It's a mess. I know you have a desire to have a bunch of knowledge. I know you want to do it, but knowledge takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. You're not going to have all the answers tomorrow. It's not going to happen. You got to spend years of acquiring knowledge to get a decent understanding. It takes time. No one's going to get it overnight. I don't care how smart you are. It doesn't work that way. Right? So with that, I'll close. I'll come back tomorrow. I'm trying to lay some foundations, because if I don't lay foundations, I just start giving you a bunch of information. You're just going to be confused. And I don't want to confuse nobody. Barakallahu fikum wa jazakumullahu khaira wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. May Allah reward you all. Inshallah, I'll see you tomorrow morning. Barakallahu fikum.